Hello and welcome to the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Chris Hemmings. Chris, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing?
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Good. Chris, as always, first question up. In your own words, what makes you a man?
It's such a huge question, Lewis, and it's such a big one to start a podcast with. So I both like it and loathe it because I've been grappling with this for 12 years now. I'm going to give you the long answer, which is, I hope, okay, given that we're on a podcast. And so when my father died when I was 26, I took all the cocaine in Manchester to try to ignore the fact that I was grieving. And that jolted me. I was a BBC journalist at the time, and it jolted me because I was meant to be this guy who had all this privilege, and which I am in many ways. And yet I was really struggling, and I couldn't understand why somebody who was so intelligent and so smart, which I am apparently, and yet was completely emotionally redundant. So I started asking questions of myself. And when I wrote my book, I started writing it in 2016. The book was called Be a Man. And I called it that because that's what my dad used to tell me. My dad told me, be a man. And I was nearly 30 by the time I wrote it. And I remember thinking, I don't know what that meant. I don't know what it means to be a man because it was completely non-defined. And yet I had all these preconceptions that to be a man meant to be emotionally strong, to never show weakness, to be brave, to be confident, to never be wrong, which I've learned subsequently is definitely not true, to be infallible. And I absorbed all of that from family life, from culture, from society, from lots of messaging that sometimes was direct, but was also sometimes indirect. And I still don't know what the answer to that question is. I definitely am male. I recognize and understand that. But what it is that makes me a man, I really don't know the answer to. It's something that me and many other men are grappling with day to day, which is why I know you ask it as your first question. So it's a tough one. The honest answer is I'm still figuring that out. And my innate maleness is something that I definitely engage with and recognize. But what qualifies me, gives me the certificate to say I am male, I don't think I know, and I don't think I ever particularly need to know now, which is a huge change for me.
Yeah, there's the reason I asked that question. I think you've summed it up really nicely, which is that the you is the important part, and that's always going to be changing. We go through seasons of life, right? We go through different things that happen, and it's trying to pull away from those preconceptions, those ideas that have been put into us by our forefathers or society as sort of a whole, and allowing us to sort of breathe a little bit as well, knowing that it's okay not to know what the answer to that question is. And I think just ask it. Just the power of just asking it is why I ask it. I think is so important. Chris, you mentioned the book, but why don't you sort of explain to the audience what it is that you're sort of getting into now and why you're on the podcast?
Sure. Yeah. So to continue the journey, I was a journalist 10 years or so, mostly at the BBC. I made documentaries. I started to write about men. The documentaries were mostly about, I always described it as issues that affect men and that men affect. And then after many years of being a journalist and being tired of writing about elections and Brexit, and then COVID came along, I met my now best mate, Annie, who is a therapist, very successful therapist, actually. She's the Your Pocket Therapist on Instagram with like 500,000 followers. She was like, put your money where your mouth is. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, why don't you train to be a therapist? And I was like, yeah, sure. I can't be a therapist. Like I'm some old rugby moron from Manchester, right? And she was like, well, actually, all these reasons. And I was like, wow, okay, interesting. I never considered it. It wasn't something that had been on my radar even as an option. So I trained as a therapist. And what was really interesting during my training was just how little in the training was relevant to men. And I've developed this this new thought, which is there's been a lot of pushback recently in the medical profession because female bodies have been treated as if they are just male bodies and react to medicine the same, which is obviously nonsense. And my thought is now, it seems to me like male minds are being treated as if they are female minds, just in different shaped bodies. And that's nonsense, because the whole concept of therapy is about our socialization. And we have to accept that male socialization is very different to female socialization. So in doing that, we need to accept that there needs to be a different approach within the therapeutic space for men. And very few men go to therapy. Very few men are therapists. About 1 in 5 therapists in the UK are male, and fewer than 1 in 4 clients are male. Men drop out of therapy at alarmingly high rates prematurely because they don't feel seen and understood in the therapy space. And so I have launched a platform, a directory, which is the first of its kind in the UK, and I think anywhere on the scale, of male therapists who specifically want to work with male clients. Because we accept, progressive people would accept that queer people need queer therapists and black people need, and not necessarily that a queer therapist is going to be the best person for a queer person to have, but that the option needs to be there and that there needs to be a space that feels like it's for them. And so I'm doing the same with Men's Therapy Hub, which is psychotherapist and counseling by men for men, to say to men, this is a place that hasn't felt like it's traditionally for us. So let's change that by saying, here's a load of men that specifically want to work with you and are willing to upend an archaic system that hasn't been tantalizing for men in any way, and to change some of the stuffy narratives around therapy and say, come to therapy and let's try something different. And in the space of 2 months, nearly 100 male therapists have signed up already, and that's blown my...
Yeah, it's amazing to hear, and congratulations on getting such a huge number. I believe one of those is James Hawes, who we had on the podcast as well, who's a big advocate for more male therapists just in general, just to get more men into that space, whether they're working with male or female clients, but just to get more men in that space. What do you think needs to change in therapy for it to be more desired by men? I think there is a little bit of, I'm not doing that. I can solve this problem on my own. So what do you think needs to change, both maybe in male perspectives, but also a rebrand for therapy, shall we say?
Yeah, it's interesting, the male perspectives line. There's a guy in the US called Zach Seidler, who is the global director for men's health for Movember, which is not a small job. And he was the first one that I saw, right, that traditionally we've... One second, I'm just adjusting the mic. Traditionally, we've said that men need to change to fit into therapy. And I think that's grossly unfair and also not possible. So actually what he said was, we need to change therapy to fit men. And the one thing that, there's many things, but the one thing that really leapt out to me during my training was we were told very specifically to be non-directive with our clients. So Lewis, if you came to therapy and you say, I have this problem, sure, for some time, it would be good for me to sit and to try to pick out what's going on, where's it come from, how's it playing out? What are the major challenges that it's causing you? But if you're sitting there and you don't have any idea of how to make a change in your life, traditional therapeutic approaches would be that I would have to sit with you until you came up with that idea. But my understanding of that would be, well, hang on, I'm being paid a pretty decent hourly rate by my clients, right? Some of them more than others, because I work on a sliding scale, because I'm a socialist at heart. And I think if I have an idea of what might help, it's not for me to say, hey, Lewis, you need to go away and do this. It would be to say, like, hey, Lewis, have you considered that maybe this might be happening and maybe this might help? This intervention, this idea, this change. And I'll set my clients challenges, like that difficult conversation that you've been putting off with your mate. We've spoken about this enough now. So your homework is go and have that conversation with your mate. But it's not to put time pressure or like you must do it by next week or you don't get to have a session. But so I say in my first session, it is, I'll meet you with empathy and compassion, I hope, in the way that every therapist would, but I'll challenge you. I'll call you on your bullshit. I'll encourage you. I'll be a bit more direct, because that's how we're used to being spoken to as men. And the other thing is, one of the huge things that we were told specifically in our training was, do not self-disclose. So I shouldn't be coming on this podcast telling you about myself because, well, what if your clients find out? Well, what if my clients find out? I'm bisexual. So when I've got a client who's struggling with internalized homophobia, been there, bro. I don't necessarily deliver it that way, but it's like, okay, I have experienced what you're talking about. So I can meet you human to human and say, I'm not going to sit and talk about my experience of it, but to say, I know that place. And that helps to have men relax in a space. And it's been amazing to see on the therapy, on Men's Therapy Hub, on the directory, there are some, I mean, there's one guy, Zach Fine, and I'm talking about his profile a lot because I think it's brilliant. He literally writes on it something like, I'm a divorced dad of 2 kids with two different parents, 2 different mums. Like here's all the shit that's happened in my life. Do you want to work with me? And some men aren't going to be drawn to him, but you know what? The right ones are, because he's self-disclosing. So he gets it. Like I messaged him and I was like, dude, you understood the memo. Like, you are doing this differently, and I applaud that.
It's really interesting because I come from my own journey with mental health, and of that time said, you need to go to therapy. And maybe there was an instant defense there. Maybe there was a no, hang on, I'm going to solve this on my own. This is my problem. I'm going to work through this. But as I sort of explored personal development and went through all the things that I went through, I sort of came to my own idea that I personally feel that therapy is something that you do when you're in a slightly better place. What's your view on that statement?
Interestingly enough, the research shows that most men come to therapy when they're at a point of crisis. And my hope is that actually we will come before the crisis occurs, because therapy is much more difficult when you're at crisis, and you're coming to therapy is kind of a last resort of, I don't have anywhere else to turn, which of course it is still there for that. So I understand this mentality that maybe therapy is there, when I'm feeling a bit better, but actually no, therapy is there to catch you when you are really struggling and you don't know where to turn. And for a lot of the men I work with, the similarities are they come to therapy, they don't have anybody else to talk to about their issues. They don't know how to talk about their issues. They don't know when to do it, where to do it, what to say. The emotional toolbox is empty. So actually very often for the first many sessions, we're filling the toolbox. You know, we're saying, let's talk. It's not just like, how did you feel? It's like, all right, what's going on with you? What is your experience? Using different language, what's your experience when this is going on? How does it play out? Starting to slowly build that toolbox up so that then we can start to get into the deeper stuff. So for you, Lewis, therapy doesn't feel like a place to go when you are at rock bottom. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that was my initial sort of view on it was, I'm not going to therapy in this current state. I think that will only make it worse. I'm going to have to open up more cans of worms and go into deep conversation. I need to personally get to a level where I feel that I can deal with those conversations.
How did you do that?
Well, it started off with looking myself in the mirror and splashing myself with cold water. And then it sort of started to build from there. So went as simple as doing 10,000 steps. I mean, some evenings doing laps around a 1-bed flat in Salford just to get them in. And then it started looking at other things, doing this podcast, quite a cathartic exercise, technically therapy in a way, right? Still having those sort of in-depth conversations with people, but not with a traditional therapist, more with friends, families, etc. And yeah, it just sort of developed from there, and self-confidence and giving up alcohol and giving up porn, all of these things have been built on that sort of that resilience base that is quite often preached in the men's space. Like, you need to build resilience for when shit hits the fan, essentially.
And I would agree with that. It sounds like you have some emotional resource to call on, which is great, because you have that what do they call it when you're self-starting, right? You have you have the ability to self-start emotionally. A lot of guys don't have that. And for those who really don't have that, bouncing ideas off a therapist or engaging in emotional discourse is the only way, really. However, I will agree with what you said, because in my introductory sessions with my clients, I make it very clear this is going to get harder before it gets easier. Because you do, as you say, open up cans of worms that have been deeply buried for decades sometimes. You do engage with challenges and difficulties that you've suppressed or repressed and pushed down for a long time because you're too scared of engaging with them. And the reality is, if you want to get better and heal, you can't ignore these things anymore. And so there will be challenges, and it will get more difficult. And perhaps that is part of the reluctance. And that's why I make it very clear to my clients, like, and when it does start to get harder, I don't say I told you so, but I kind of do. I'm like, do you remember what we agreed at the start? You're in it now. This is where it starts to hurt, you know? You're doing this 12-kilometer run every day, right, for 365 days, which is amazing, by the way, and everybody should go and donate to Lewis. That starts off, first few days, first few weeks, not so bad. But when you're in the middle of it, it starts to be grueling. Right? It starts to really hurt. Every day it starts to hurt. I'm sure. I've not tried it, but I can assume. And it's the same. You have to go through the shit. You have to go through the difficulty if you want to improve and come out the other side in better shape. And that's the law of nature, and that's what we're dealing with here. So it does make sense what you're saying, and the reluctance. That's why engaging with it directly and pointing out and calling a spade when you need to.
To be honest with you, Chris, this is a really refreshing conversation for me. I think a lot of men are scared of therapy. I think they're scared of therapy with another male, whether that's this sort of alpha male approach to it, where it's like, I'm not going to tell him what's wrong with me because he can use that against me, or he can sort of that caveman side of things. But you've mentioned a few people that have done this self-disclosure where they've sort of basically said, here are all my warts, so you're free to do that. How powerful do you genuinely think that's going to be?
Hugely. In my first business, which is called Empath, M-Path, it's a cheesy play on words about empathy and masculinity. We've been going into schools in the UK now for like 6-7 years. And the number one rule, which we stole/borrowed from the Mankind Project in the US, is that if you want to stand on a stage and you want to engage men and boys in challenging discourse, the first thing you have to do is disclose your own flaws. You have to stand in front of them and say, I have made mistakes. I am not here to preach. And the way I describe it is, a lot of the old narratives would be to try to come up above men and pull them up to where we are, to say, hey, holier than thou, right? I'm holier than thou and you should be more like me. Which, I initially had that approach after I was doing this work after my book came out, and like, fuck me for that. Like, fuck off, Chris. Like, come on. Like, who the fuck did I think I was, right? And so I went away and did research and tried to understand how. And the refrain is always, meet men where they're at. That's the Tony Porter, a call to men in the US, meet men where they're at. When you can do that, it's the great leveler. And it's where in our initial sessions, in our consultation sessions at the very end, I will say, hey, even if we don't work together after this, well done for making it this far. Because I know how hard it is to get this far. It took me 18 months to get to this point after I first realized I needed therapy many years ago, to actually dare to do it. So trust me, I know how hard it is for you to be here. So well done. And even if you don't choose to work with me, I hope you choose to work with somebody, because you've done the hardest part. And you see that moment of like, oh, this guy is not just a professional, this guy's also human. And it's like, yeah, we're all human. And we're all bringing ourselves into the space, unless you're like super psychoanalytical, which I strongly disagree with. The kind of, one of my clients once had an experience, and this is not personal to him, so I know he won't mind me talking about it, of going to do trauma work with a psychoanalytical therapist who's like a super Freudian therapist. And he sat down and she went, oh, why did you choose to sit in that chair? Because there was multiple to choose from. And he immediately just goes like, fuck off. Like, what? Like, what do we, what? It's comfy. Just shut up and let's talk about my pain. Like, and it's really about normalizing that the person that you're sitting in front of has also done this work, is also someone who struggles, is also human. You know, the most common thing that I disclose to my clients is my wife asks me regularly, why is it that you don't ask for help? And I say to her, because I was a man long before I was a therapist. And I still haven't unlearned that. That there are times when she's like, you could just ask for help. And I'm like, fuck, she's so right. Why didn't I just do that? Because we're so deeply ingrained. And it's to meet them in that. And it does help. It does help for them to ground and land in the space, because therapy is terrifying to a lot of guys. They think they're going to come and be judged. They think they're going to come and be told that they're wrong, that what they've done is incorrect. They think I'm going to be laughing because they don't have the skills to do it. And it's like the sooner I can help them to feel like, hey, we're a team in here, like we're in this together, and like I feel you, and I know the place that you're at, even, and I might not know specifically, but I know some of the challenges of opening up. Then we can start. So okay, now the therapeutic relationship is the thing that is the biggest predictor of success. So let's build a relationship, shall we?
Let's talk about that sort of middle ground where it's like maybe where I'm at, right? Where it's like I've maybe done a bit of work, or I know therapy could help, but I've still not sat down with a therapist. What are some of the tips that you would give to a man to start looking or considering going to therapy?
Yeah. Here's the problem. If you type in therapist near me in the UK, you will come up across Psychology Today or Counseling Directory. And they, bless them, they do excellent work. But you are then faced with thousands upon thousands of profiles. And where the hell do you start? And when you click on a profile on one of those, particularly on Counseling Directory, and I sound like I'm doing advertising for them, but I hope I'm not. You click on a therapist profile, and there's like 1,000 words on there of, here's how I work, here's about my practice, here's how I trained. There's a video you can watch. Here's all my education. Here's all the different therapeutic styles that I utilize. Here's what I specialize in. And you can choose like 30 things that you specialize in, which is like that's not specialist. No. And it's just information overload. And so what we've tried to do on a Men's Therapy Hub is on your profile, there is an about me, and you've got 800 characters. And then there's my approach with men, and you've got 800 characters. And then you've got how we get started, and that's like 300 characters, and that's it. And you've got 5 specialisms to choose from, and that's it. And so because the problem is that if it becomes overwhelming, you give men an off-ramp. They can't deal with it. I don't know what any of this means. What's transactional analysis? What's Gestalt therapy? What does cognitive behavioral, what's the difference? I don't know. So first of all, the way that I chose my first therapist, which picture seems like the guy that I'm most likely to want to have a chat with? Whose profile least offended me in terms of their approach, right? And the number one thing to do, and I describe picking a therapist as like choosing a winter coat. You don't go out in October and say, I need a new winter coat, and go into one shop, try on a coat, and go, do you know what? I'm just not going to wear a coat this winter. You go out and you try a few coats on, and then you go, okay, maybe I'm going to come back the next day and go to a different place and try some different coats on. Yeah. Because most therapists now will offer a 15-minute free consultation. Some have a slightly cheaper first session. Go and try some people out. Every client I've had who says, you're on my list, but I've got a few more sessions with other potential therapists. I'm like, good, well done. That's the right approach. Because you might sit with me and you might think, who's this hipster dude with the blonde hair and the earring? Oh, maybe actually I like his approach. And then maybe you'll have 5 minutes with me and think, this guy's a prick. I don't like him at all. Or maybe you'll think, I'm not really into how this guy looks, but I like what he's saying, so I'll give him a try. And maybe after 30 seconds, you go, okay, I like this guy's vibe. And then if you do like my vibe, try me out. Try therapists out for 3-4 sessions. Don't just do 1 or 2. Try 3, 4. And if it's not working out for you, okay, take it back, right? Take the coat back. Go and get a different one. Try a different one. And that is the frustrating thing about it. But we are raised in this world where, like, okay, you go to the GP, you don't have choice over who your GP is, really. You don't have choice who your healthcare professionals are. But in the therapy world, you do. You have a choice over who they are, how to access them, look at how they work. You know, I'm adamant with my clients that we have to do it every week to begin with, unless it's very special circumstances. And if that doesn't work for you, then cool, go and find somebody else. Other therapists will be cool doing it once a month to begin with. I'm not. And it is about finding the best fit, because as I said before, the biggest predictor of success in therapy is the quality of the relationship. So you might have doctor therapist with all of the degrees and, 20 years of experience, but he might not be the right therapist for you. One of the best therapists I ever had was a guy when I was a trainee. He was a trainee. He was like 2 years ahead of me, and I was paying 20 quid an hour for low-cost therapy, and he was wonderful because we bonded and we worked well together. It's as simple as that. And I've recently had a queer German guy as my therapist because I live in Copenhagen and he lives and works here. And I'm a guy from Manchester. Like, I'm sure I'm bisexual, but like we're very different, but we worked really well together. And that's wonderful. So take your time, be brave and bold, and be willing to say no to people, and do work to find the right therapist for you, because you know what? It is a big outlay of time, and it is about big outlay of expenditure. So make it worthwhile.
I'm really glad that you've said that, because I've had a lot of conversations around men being loyal to a fault and having issues with that in relationships and friends and those sort of things. And I think the same's with therapy, right? Do you think people can outgrow therapists and need to move on to different ones? Like, is that sort of how you see this journey of therapy?
Yes, I didn't go back to my original therapist because I felt when I wanted to go back for more therapy, I was like, you know what? He's not the guy for me now. I want to go and find somebody else. I wanted to find somebody with different life experience, with a different understandings, deal with a different problem, actually, a specific issue that I had faced in my life, and a trauma that had resurfaced. So I went to find a guy who had some expertise on trauma. And yeah, you can absolutely outgrow your therapist. In essence, it's kind of a weird profession being a therapist, because I make the joke with my clients in our final sessions, and I'm like, I hope I never see you again. Right. Of course, if you want me to be your therapist in the future, then that would be great. I'm open to that. But also, my business is constantly trying to put myself out of business. And I hope my clients outgrow me. And I hope my clients outgrow their need to see me. And I don't want to ever be a therapist that clients become reliant on, because then I'm not really a therapist. Then I'm just I don't know, I become just like a talking shop for like, oh, here's my shit from this week, which is fine for a time. But actually then, how can I encourage you to go and find that space in your day-to-day life? Because that's more sustainable. So yes, people absolutely outgrow therapists for multiple different reasons. And also because you have different challenges throughout your life. So if you're dealing with OCD in your 20s, maybe your OCD is under control when in your 30s you're dealing with relationship issues. And then maybe in your 40s you're dealing with grief. And maybe one therapist, one therapist to rule them all, but maybe not. Maybe there's multiple therapists out there for you. The only thing would be, don't have two therapists at the same time.
Just like a relationship then.
Unless you're polyamorous, but
Exactly.
but don't be polytherapist.
One of the things that you mentioned in sort of your initial sessions is all around sort of emotional intelligence and sort of building that up to scratch. And that's probably one of the main things that sort of come out in recent years for men. Men need to talk more. Men need to understand emotions. Men need to cry. These are sort of things that are said. Normally, that's done in front of a partner or a friend. What's your thoughts on the statement, men can cry?
Well, of course, men can cry. Evolution has given us this gift of tears, which actually is a way for us to release one of the building blocks for stress hormones out of our body. So it's a gift. However, male tear ducts narrower than female tear ducts, so literally harder for men to cry on average. However, I push back against this idea that men it's okay to cry, because actually we've learned from very early on that it's not okay for us to cry. We have been socialized to understand that crying often comes with judgment, with ridicule, with shame. And the research on crying is really interesting. So just simply the act of crying is not necessarily beneficial. If you want tears to feel good, your tears need to be met with empathy and compassion by the people. So if I'm going to cry, Lewis, and you're going to go, I hear your pain, I'm going to sit with it, I understand why you're crying, it's okay that you're crying, my tears are going to have a net benefit to my psyche and my physiology, because it's a physical thing too, it's a release. If I'm off crying on my own and nobody is giving me that empathy and compassion, crying is not necessarily good, but it's not necessarily bad either. It's kind of net negative. To cry and be met with ridicule and shame and judgment actually has a net negative impact on our psychology and physiology. And so think about the amount of times that you as a man have been, when you've been socialized and you've cried and you've been told crying is for girls, man up, stop crying. Like, why are you crying? What the thing that you're feeling bad about doesn't warrant tears, which is the most common thing I would guess for men. So we have associated crying with a net negative psychological and physiological feeling. So our subconscious then tells us repeatedly, well, no, don't cry, because it doesn't actually feel good when we do. So to simply tell men it's okay to cry goes against generations worth of programming and decades worth of individual socializing, which tells that individual man that crying isn't okay. So you can't just say it's okay to cry. It's the same as when we tell men it's okay to talk, or men, it's time to talk. It's like, when, where, how, about what, to who? Like, plus most of the guys I know don't shut the hell up. What are you talking about? Like, it's not about crying more. It's not about talking more. It's about how do we help men to understand that it's okay for them to cry? How do we help them? How do we give them the space and the tools to have the release? How do we say to men, I know that you would like to talk more. I know that you don't know how. And engage them in the bravery and courage it takes, because they will say some dumbass crap that makes them and their mates feel really awkward to begin with. But how do we kind of pop that balloon and say, like, yeah, that's going to happen? Like, that just will happen. That's part of the process. And it takes a lot of courage and bravery to do it. And it's calling in the masculine and saying, do you have the courage to feel the shame of crying? Do you have the courage to feel the shame of saying the dumbass crap and not knowing what to say? Because that's what it takes. So we can't just tell men it's okay to cry. We have to actually allow them to begin to understand that there are spaces where they can go. And one of the most common things that clients tell me after my fourth session, I always have a check-in after the fourth session, and they say, I've never been to somewhere where I haven't been judged for my feelings. And I'm like, well, if I judge you, I'd be shit at my job, but I'm glad you feel it, because that's the power of the space. I'm not going to judge you. You can be a torch waving racist, and I'm not going to judge you for it. I will find out why you're a torch waving racist, and I will try to meet you with compassion in that, because nobody is born a torch waving racist, right? It's about compassion. And if we can start to feel that in the space, you know, I've had clients who the first 7, 8, 9 sessions just crying. They're just crying because they finally can.
It's powerful stuff, and it's really interesting stuff. You talk about finding a space, and we talk about those sort of preconceptions of manhood. And I want to just sort of touch on privilege a little bit, because there'll be some people listening to this that might say, well, I can't afford therapy. I can't get to these kind of things. Sort of white working class, if you will, the sort of the forgotten bloke, if you will. How do we start to reach those sort of men where they are, to use your sort of phrase.
Yeah, interestingly, I wrote something today about privilege, which is about this concept of we kind of use privilege as this shield, right? To say, men, you are privileged, and therefore your problems are less important, let's say. And the real savagery of that is that, and I don't need to tell you the statistics around suicide, addiction, violence, homelessness, like so many places where men aren't privileged. And sure, men are privileged in some ways, but there are a lot of men out there who are really struggling. And white working class boys have the lowest life expectancy of any social group and the lowest socioeconomic chances of any social group in the UK. So to tell those boys, well, first of all, to tell them that they're privileged only serves to undermine their bias that they already have, that their emotions and their problems are less important. So it makes it less likely that they'll that they'll reach out for help. But the real challenge is, how do we as therapists engage and reach out to more men who don't have the means to pay top whack for therapy? And I have a sliding scale, as I mentioned. I also have 2 slots, which are 50 quid a week, 50 quid a session, which are for student and unemployed people. I know there are people around the country. There are therapists on Men's Therapy Hub that charge only £40 for a session, and that's their base rate. And it's based on where they live in the country. You know, I live in Copenhagen, so I couldn't live if I charged 40 quid an hour. I just can't. And there are low-cost therapy options. There are places to go where, like I did, you can get a trainee therapist, and trainee therapists are still excellent therapists. Some of them, not all, but not all therapists are very good. I'm sure some of my previous clients would say that I wasn't a good therapist, and I'm sure some would. So there are places to go. So go online and type in low-cost therapy, and either you can do it online. Most therapy is, I would guess now, is carried out online because it saves an hour commute to go to a therapist across London or somewhere out of your town. And also therapists then can charge a bit less because we don't have to pay for rooms. And so there are low-cost options out there. There are some behemoth tech organizations, and I'm not going to name names because apparently they're extremely litigious, who are offering cheap therapy, but they are less interested in the therapy and more interested in the money. And the therapists themselves don't get much money. So I would always advise to go direct to a therapist. Men's Therapy doesn't take any money from the sessions. Go direct to a therapist, but find the low-cost organizations because they exist and they want to help. And if you can't afford to go to a therapist, type in men's talking groups near me and go to Andy's Man Club, go to Men's Sheds, go to Mentel, go to the Proper Blokes Club, go to any of these spaces where men meet, because you'll meet men who are doing the work, like-minded guys who are doing the work, who've all been that person who has walked in that door on day one and felt as awkward as you have. There are spaces increasingly everywhere now where men are doing the work together. And the more that we can help each other, because this is about us, this is about men doing the work. And the more we can do that, the more we're going to affect wider social change and make it easier for our sons and their sons to come through and not need as much emotional support as we might.
I was going to ask you what your thoughts are on group therapy. Are you sort of a big advocate of finding that person that you can be emotionally secure with, whether that is a professional or someone that you have a trusted bond with?
We all need to be mirrored. There's a new magazine coming out called The Power of Men magazine, and I've written an article for it. The first piece I've written for it is about male loneliness. And the interesting thing about male loneliness is the vast majority of lonely men, it's not because they're physically isolated. It is because they are emotionally isolated. So I tell the story of the 2 men going to the pub. One man is going through a divorce. His best mate comes in the pub. They sit down and go, "All right, mate. Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing?" "Yeah, I'm good too." They both know the guy who's going through a divorce is lying. They both know that. And so they sit for the rest of the evening talking about anything and everything other than how they actually feel. And what that does is it disconnects us. It creates emotional isolation. So the beauty of therapy is a good therapist will be able to mirror your experience and reflect back at you. It's amazing how often a client will say like, wow, it's really good to hear my experience reflected back by somebody else who's just listened, right? It's like therapy 101, reflecting back. And organizations like Andy's Man Club, they're not group therapy necessarily, but they're group work. If you're going to have 10 guys in a circle and you're going because your marriage has just fallen apart and you're not seeing your kids anymore and you're feeling lonely, guarantee you at least one guy in that group is going to go, yep, I know that place. I've been there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm not the only one. Okay. My clients will often be like, oh, what I'm experiencing isn't normal. And I have to say like, well, first of all, the fuck is normal? But secondly, like, you would be surprised how often I hear something very similar or identical to this, because there's nothing new under the sun, right? I've only been a therapist for like 4 years. And yet I'm hearing repeat stories over and over again because there's so much commonality in the male experience. So yeah, going into a space where we can feel like we are seen and heard and understood, it is like it's like someone takes the weight of the world off our shoulders, because suddenly it's a burden that's shared, and we can share each other's and hold each other, and it's the most brilliant, beautiful thing when it's done well, which actually most of these groups do really well.
That's a thing that comes up quite a lot, this idea that my problems are unique. Is there any sort of reasoning why we think we're so special?
Well, there's main player syndrome, or whatever you want to call it, right? Main character syndrome, sorry. We are all the center of our own universe, right? That is just a unifying thing about humans. We're all the center of our own universe. Some of us take that a bit more seriously than others, and a bit more literally than others. Think about this. If you've grown up in an environment, let's say traditionally women have grown up in an environment where 14, 15-year-old girl will come to auntie's mum, grandma, and say, I'm having this physical experience. And the auntie goes like, oh yeah, I remember that when I was your age. And I remember how actually terribly my grandma, who's deaf in the corner now and can't hear, how she dealt with it. We're going to like, we don't have that as men. We don't have someone going like, oh, you're being shamed because you haven't fully developed and you're wearing Speedos at school and you have to go swimming, and everyone can see that you don't have a large penis because you're 14, and like nobody does at 14. I remember that happened to me or someone that I knew, and we can talk about that. Like, we don't have that unifying experience. We don't have that understanding. So we grow up, and because everything is internalized rather than externalized, women externalize, men internalize. Because of that, we don't get mirrored in our experiences. So how can we know that other men are experiencing similar things? Because we don't give ourselves the opportunity to be mirrored in that way, which is why therapy is so good, which is why the reflection is so good, to say, you know what? In the last session, you told me this, and this session, you're telling me that. Have you ever thought about how it's linked like this? And you just see this like light bulb explode in their brain, and they're like, oh, whoa. Like, how did I never see that? It's so obvious. And that's where I say, you know what? I have these moments with my therapist too, where I go, fuck you, man. Like, fuck, that's so obvious now that you say it, but I could never have seen that. Because we need someone to witness us. We all need someone. Anybody who says they don't need validation is somebody who is insecure about being validated and is lonely and is making excuses for it. It's where this concept of the Sigma male comes from, which we can get into if you want. But we all need validation. We all need to be seen. We all need to be understood, because it's what makes us human.
Maybe in part 2 we can sort of delve into that one a little bit more. Chris, what in the men's space do you like right now, and what do you want to see a little bit more of?
What I love is just how many men are doing this work now. In the past 2-3 years, there has been an explosion of organizations going into schools, of mental health and wellness campaigns specifically looking at men. The left wing, the Labour Party and the Democrats in the US have finally recognized that men's issues are important. And there's actually a men's health strategy going through Parliament right now in the UK. Like, hey, finally, well done. progressives, so-called, are starting to understand that yes, women, different races, ethnicities, religions, sexualities, genders, all need tailored specific support. And that includes straight white men. Thank you very much. Finally. So that's good. What we need more of, and it probably won't surprise you to know that I'm going to say we need more men in psychotherapeutic work. We need more. We need campaigns just like we did for women in STEM to get men into heal, health, education, administration, literature, to get men into teaching professions, to get men studying psychology at university, to encourage men into therapy and counseling, to encourage more men, because you can't be what you can't see. So more men doing what you're doing, Lewis, which is daring to start a podcast and putting yourself out there and saying, here's some of my emotional fragilities. And this is not a podcast called the Lewis Knows Best podcast, right? This is the Lewis Wants to Know More About Things podcast. And that's great. More men who are willing to be brave enough to say, I need help. I don't understand what's going on. Or I'm going to learn so that I can teach the next generation. And the more that we can do that, the irony is, the biggest irony of all is that the more we do that for men, the better life is going to be for everybody. But it's just this huge disconnect between those two realities that exist. And we are moving slowly in that direction. And I was speaking to Mark Brooks earlier today for my own podcast, which I'll get you on at some point, Lewis. I do my podcast, you do yours. Oh, no, I do your podcast, you do mine. Is this sense of there is a huge sea change happening right now. And the new Policy Research Centre for Men and Boys, which is launched in the UK, Mark's just told me that all three political parties during conference season are having a meeting with MPs at conference to talk about men and boys issues, and MPs from every party are going to be there to speak. And even 5 years ago, that would have been unheard of. You would have got it at the Conservative Party conference, but not the others. Finally, we're starting to recognize, finally. And I'm really excited for the next 5 years because I feel like there's going to be a huge change.
I'm super excited too. Mark's been in the space for 15 years and he would sort of agree with you. These last 3 years have really seen an explosion for sure. But Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. If people have liked what they've heard and they want to find out more, where is the best place to find you? And I will leave the final thoughts with yourself.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on and for doing this work. Best place to find me, don't try and find me. Try and find Men's Therapy Hub, www.menstherapyhub.co.uk. And we're on Instagram, and we'll soon be on TikTok. And we're also on LinkedIn. You can find us there. And if you go on Men's Therapy Hub and you want to find a therapist, you can find me if you want. There's also 100 other guys on there right now. And I challenge you to do it. I challenge you to be brave enough to do it, because it will take bravery. It will take courage for you to take that first step. But there are an increasing number of men who are ready and willing to meet you in a space that you need to be met, and who want to do the work with you and who want to guide you through the difficulty that you're going through, because you can't do it alone. We've been socialized to think that that's what we have to do. But personal growth and development can't happen in isolation. Our podcast, which hasn't launched yet, is called No Man's an Island, because we're not. We are village creatures. We are social beings, and you deserve to be met in your pain. And if you would allow someone to witness your pain and mirror you and work with it through you, I'm almost certain that you will find some solace and some growth from it. And if you don't, change therapist, try something else. But do something, because you can't do it on your own.